City of Niagara Falls, Seth Piccirillo and Robert Rustino. Our debate tonight is hosted by the Niagara Gazette at WJJL Radio. I'm Rick Pfeiffer. I'm a reporter with the Niagara Gazette and your moderator for the debate tonight. Your questioners will be Niagara Gazette Regional News Director Mark Scheer and WJJL talk show host Tom Darrow. To begin our debate, we will have opening statements from each candidate. The order of the opening statements was determined by a Super Bowl-style coin toss. Mr. Rustino, you are first.
Thank you, Rick. First, please let me welcome everyone as well to tonight, and I want to thank the Gazette and WJJL for sponsoring this. I also want to thank all of you for being here. It is, I know I speak on my behalf, but I'm sure also on the other candidates that are in the race. Thank you for your interest. The City of Niagara Falls is at a point, I'm sure, as you read the newspapers each day, is at a point where bold leadership is what will be necessary in order for us to move from the location that we're in right now. As you look upon the rest of the, as you go through the city, rather, you see the effects of a lack of attention to the growth of business. We need, one of the most pervasive problems in our community now is poverty. And that poverty sits at the base of so many of the problems that we face today. As a consequence, I am committed to the growth of our non-tourist industry, and to that end believe that the best way to accomplish that will be with the collaborative work of not only our first-ring suburbs, but also the County of Niagara. As we have tried for so many decades, Niagara Falls has always tried to fix itself on its own. We're at a point now where obviously that hasn't worked, and it's necessary for us to take on as much help as we can to grow our economy, stabilize our finances, and move the city to the greatness that I think everybody in this room anticipates or expects and hopes for Niagara Falls. I can tell you that I am approaching this race not because I need a job, or I have to protect somebody's job, or that I have to give somebody a job. I'm simply in this because, like so many of you, I care about the city. And so I am Robert Rustino, Democratic candidate for mayor, and I appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Rustino. Mr. Piccirillo.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our hosts. I feel grateful to be here for the same reason I feel grateful to be a candidate. This evening and this whole process is a chance to create community. Answering your questions and talking about my platform in detail really speaks to the heart of what my campaign's all about. It's about you and what's important to your neighborhoods. A little bit of background about me. I am part of a generation that completely did not see the golden era of Niagara Falls. My education, my work experience, my volunteerism, this run for office is all a way for me to best serve a place that I love and to help find solutions instead of just describe the problem. So most of my generation left, but many of us stayed, many of us here today, because this is home and it's a lifetime commitment to make it better. My wife Kelly and I specifically stayed because we have a 4-year-old Tessa and a 1-year-old Nola, and we firmly believe that they are going to be the first born into a generation that will see this place's descent. So I can't speak to the past, but I can speak to the work, because if we put the work in, that's the future that we can create. It's the work that I know. It's community development director. It's that relationship with you in rooms like this that allowed us to renovate over 450 houses, improve or create 16 new parks, create a home ownership auction, reduce costs in our department through sound management and aggressive fundraising, to bring life back to the former South Junior, to put trades training back in the heart of our city, to put a food co-op on Highland Avenue, to create a participatory budgeting process that lets you make the decisions, to provide leadership Niagara Falls can be proud of. As mayor, it's this relationship that's also going to allow us to create a tax structure that actually rewards good ownership by our homeowners and our small business owners instead of punishing them, to create a public policing strategy that starts well before the caution tape's up. So I'm a first-time candidate. This is my first debate. I know there's tactics in debating. I know I'm not supposed to speak with my hand. That ship has sailed. I'm really not here for a debate. I'm here to talk to you and answer your questions. And I'm
Thank you,
excited
Mr.
for the conversation. Sorry.
Sorry. Our first question will be, Mr. Restano will come from Tom Darrow.
Actually, a twofold question. The compact with the casino, Seneca Casino, expires in 2023. But if you're elected, you're going to take office and possibly face a problem with this ongoing arbitration that's being challenged. Number one, do you have plans for a committee to address the city's interest in this possible renewal of the compact? And how would you deal with this problem of the arbitration, which is not being honored at this point?
Well, with regard to the arbitration that's not being honored, I think that that's obviously a problem that the state and Senecas, they're dealing with that. On my end, if I were mayor, on my end, I would be prepared to have direct conversation with the Seneca Nation. Last fall, I had the chance to do that, and the Seneca Nation leaders are not blind to the fact that they do have an obligation to the city for services provided. It's just necessary for us to engage in that conversation with them. You really can't get anything accomplished without that kind of conversation. What was the other part of the question, Tom?
The compact with the state expires in 2023. Would you be prepared to have a committee formed for the city's interest in the renegotiation of that possible compact?
Well, there's no question that what I'd want to do is I'd want to be a part of the negotiation process, whether it's part of a committee or whether it's just injecting myself. I think the time has come for us to talk to Albany in a much more direct way about the impact that their conversation with the Seneca have upon us. So whether it's the creation of a committee or whether it's just myself engaging directly in the conversations, I do think the city of Niagara Falls needs to be involved, and I would begin the conversation in advance of that, talking to the Seneca about the services provided.
Mr. Piccirillo, 1 minute.
So I said in November that we need to really fully explore direct negotiation with the Seneca. If this arbitration continues forth, we still have to look at that. We are in uncharted territory. No elected official that's in office right now was a part of negotiating the compact. But we do have the most skin in the game. We gave up acres upon acres of land to this compact. So I think we do need to explore direct negotiation. I would do that on day one. It would be my first meeting. As far as the compact, it's a large compact that was negotiated with many stakeholders that receive funds that don't, as I said, have as much taxable land skin in the game. So I think the new compact has to have the city at the focus of it, as opposed to just one entity that receives money.
Mr. Scheer, your question is to Seth Piccirillo.
This is something of a follow-up to what Tom just asked, but if we assume the worst-case scenario, this is actually something that a reader mentioned to us. If we assume the worst-case scenario, and this process drags on, and the money doesn't arrive, the city has a pretty big budget hole. So what would you do as mayor to address the financial issue?
So we have
Absent casino.
Sure, we have a tendency to look at trying to cut our way out of a deficit, right? Our first thought is to take a service away from a homeowner or a small business owner. What we never address is the complete backwards setup that we have in our tax structure. We need to look at a different way to tax our properties. I've talked about a land value tax because we are shouldering an unfair burden, whereas you have out-of-town land speculators that are paying much less for our parcels. You have tax agreements that are given to developers that, again, give them a lower tax rate. All of this builds into the structural deficit. So, of course, we need to make decisions immediately if arbitration continues to not pay out. But in 2020, we need to realize that we have to grow our revenue picture in order to have a sustainable financial budget.
Mr. Restano, 1 minute.
Growing our revenue picture by taxing entities is never a healthy method. Our economy has to grow by adding jobs and business opportunities. As it relates to the deficit that we obviously face, clearly talking with the other public entities, the Water Authority, with whom I've already had conversations, the Board of Education, as well as the Housing Authority. There are a variety of ways in which we can perhaps streamline some of the services that we provide that's cost effective for all of us. I think it's important to remember that any effort to change the property tax structure is not only something that can't happen quickly, but in my conversations with state officials is a non-starter in Albany. The reality is that ultimately, to change the tax structure in a state that has a tax cap, as well as the fact that so many of the developments downtown deal with incentive packages that affect just the improvements, anything that would impact the land would actually become a double tax.
Thank you, Mr.
Things regarding, we talk about balancing budget and increasing revenue streams. Your feelings toward a control board for the city of Niagara Falls?
Well, my first inclination is that that's something we would want to avoid. I know so many folks when I talk to them, either at their homes or in coffee shops or lunch counters, that's the first thing that they talk about because they're frustrated. I think the first thing we need to do, the first line of attack, is that we have to have common sense leadership that takes a look at the way in which we're currently funding our services, and we need to create a smarter budget, one that doesn't necessarily duplicate the processes that are going on throughout so many other levels of government within our community. So a control board isn't necessarily the best answer. Is it ultimately an answer that might confront the city? I'm certain that if things don't get better, that's one of the things that you'll hear an awful lot of elected officials talking about. But at least at this stage, my sense is that with some common sense leadership, and leadership that's not afraid to make the tough choices, that we can fix the budget problem. It's not going to be fixed in 1 year, but it's certainly something that we can attack. And I would submit to you that with a little bit of hard work, we could probably trim the current structural deficit almost in half relatively quickly. Because I think what we have in talking to some of the departments is the fact that they know ways in which they can save money within their departments. And so I think that, again, once you have leadership in City Hall that's prepared to address those issues, have department heads who are prepared to make those choices, then you can fix it.
1 minute, Mr. Becquerel.
So I'm one of those department heads that have reduced the cost in this department by 50%, but that type of cost savings is not going to fix the problem alone. I think saying that we are waiting for a control board or that we can't change our tax structure is resigned thinking. I think that's just waiting for someone else to save us. I think the way that we can change our financial picture is creative thinking, and not something that's completely out of the box, but looking at tax structures that work in other cities comparable in size that have been adopted in New York State. I think that we can set our own course, and I think that saying that something's a non-starter based on a conversation, I don't think that's good enough, and I don't think it's leadership. So again, cutting alone isn't going to change everything. It's smart, and again, as I said, I'm someone who's done it, but I'm telling you that there is more that's needed. A structural deficit shows a significant problem, and we have to use creative thinking to get out of it.
Mr. Sheard and Mr. Becquerel.
In the city of Niagara Falls for many years now, blighted properties, abandoned properties, derelict properties, property speculators, problems with properties generally has been a big problem for many, many years. So what do we do about that if you're the mayor?
So there's a couple things that we would want to double down on that we started. We do an aggressive home renovation project. We are working with banks. We've eliminated 125 bank zombie properties over the last 3 years. But we do need to reform our role in housing court. That is not to insult any judges in housing court. I want to make it clear. I think we need to go to a direct ticketing system where we fine directly for these types of infractions, because if we don't, property owners are going to disregard housing court, and then, as they say, they're just going to bleed the property. They won't pay taxes. They will get as much rent as possible. They can continue to collect social service revenue because the only thing that stops that is a condemnation. So we need to directly fine people, and again, it goes back to having a tax structure that makes it harder for people to just completely disregard their properties and not care for them. Because if we improve our properties, we put an addition on, our taxes go up. If an absentee landlord just believes their property, their taxes go down, and the properties around them are devalued. So I think we need to change our legal enforcement, and that's something I'd want to do on day one.
Mr. Rosano, 1 minute.
Well, Seth and I disagree profoundly on a lot of different items. This is one where he and I have some common ground. I do believe that there needs to be a change in the structure of housing court. So many times we take a look at other examples and think that we can just retrofit that. The problem is that the city of Niagara Falls doesn't have specific statutory language for a housing court. With the teeth in the housing court, we would be able to make landlords and property owners responsible for their property. So I would submit that that's the legislation we should be advancing to Albany, one that gives us the kind of strength to do the things that we need to do to improve the blighted houses, the abandoned homes, as well as the, and the other thing too that I think we should do is we should be taking a look, and I know that we do some of this already, and I know that we used to do quite a bit of it in the past. We also need to make available to people the opportunity for grants for improvement, and I know that there are programs available for that. That to me allows people who are otherwise struggling to perhaps do the things necessary.
All right, so that I don't have my questioners asking the same question to the same people each time, we're going to flip the questioners now. Mr. Scheer, let you direct a question to Mr. Restato.
I wasn't really prepared for that, I'm sorry, but
It's the curveball.
I guess we could talk about another big problem in the city, and that's crime. We just had another shooting yesterday, as we reported. We've had multiple incidents on Pine Avenue and all across the city, and crime is a consistent problem in Niagara Falls, and almost synonymous in some ways with Niagara Falls, unfortunately. So what would be the plan for public safety in the city with obvious budgetary limitations?
Well, I think obviously the very first thing certainly is presence and a heightened presence by our department. Again, in talking with law enforcement professionals, they have methods to increase their presence in the community, as well as to bring about the cooperation of other law enforcement agencies to the extent that that's available to us, as well as at the level at which we're permitted to have it. But I think that fundamentally, the question of crime goes to the question of poverty. I think that if we can begin the process of growing business opportunities and job opportunities, we can start taking a chunk out of the whole issue of crime. I think ultimately, if the city begins to grow economically, some of these things begin to find their way out of the city. At this point, the city has a variety of challenges. And so the reporting of crime and the uptick that we see in crime is really a symptom of a more deeper problem, and that is the problem of poverty in the community. So again, working with our partners in the county, with whom I've had a couple of conversations about some projects and plans, I know that they're just waiting to help. And so I know on my first opportunity, I'm going to invite them in here to join our business development teams to increase our job opportunities and our business opportunities and make Niagara Falls an easier place for businesses to come and grow.
Mr. Briccarello, 1 minute.
So I have full confidence in our first responders. Yesterday, I was in a 5-car accident, and when we called 911, our first responders were right there. So I have confidence that they can address these problems. I have a 3-phase approach: immediately, mid-range, and culture change. I think immediately we need to change some of our staffing levels to get more of the police officers that are in the station out on the beat. We also have to make sure that we are providing them with the equipment, especially vehicles, that they need for modern policing. When police officers have bad equipment, morale goes down. So we have to address that immediately. We also have to work with civil service. Right now, if you know it or not, it's hard to hire a police officer. It's hard for a police officer to transfer in here. We need to get some concessions with civil service. It's those types of details that matter. And also, we do need to look at the culture change. Community policing is a mindset. Using data-driven hotspots, which our officers have the ability to use as a mindset. We have to make sure that the officers that work a beat are the ones that are going to neighborhood events and things happening where they work. So when someone sees a police officer, it's not just on their worst day ever.
Thank you, Mr. Pecoraro. Mr. Darrow to Mr. Pecoraro.
I'm sure many people who came to this event tonight drove through the heart of the city, and at some point they experienced trash, garbage, televisions that people have left on other people's properties. This happens quite a bit in alleys around the community. Obviously, we know that televisions are electronic recyclable and you can't put them out in the garbage, so people put them out in other people's garbages. We have an unsightly problem in the city. Is there a way that perhaps you can configure a plan that would eliminate this? And I say that with this in mind. At one point in our history, we had a DPW director who saw illegal dumping. The result of it actually went by hand through the garbage to track down the people who disposed of it there, and they were arrested. I'm not suggesting that, but is there any kind of plan to eliminate this kind of debris being dumped in alleys or in front of people's homes?
So I think we need to renegotiate the trash removal contract. I think a lot of the problems that you're seeing over the last couple of years started then. There's changes in recycling rates that are also making it harder to recycle. We need to get some concessions, and as mayor, I think we need to renegotiate that. I'm a person that has spent some time cleaning those alleys, and not as much as I know there's people here that spend a lot of time cleaning alleys. The illegal dumping absolutely increased with the change of that contract. I think we need to change that. We also have to take a look at certain areas. There's two things we can do. I think we need to station certain dumpsters in areas, because you're seeing people that are just throwing things in alleys. And when policing is available, there is technology and very small cameras that can help, especially contractor dumping. Now, the problem with contractor dumping is not a contractor who's got their emblem on their truck, right? It's an unmarked vehicle. There's smart policing technology. Also, if we can improve our lighting, especially in our alleys, I think it would be less easy to do.
Mr. Stein, 1 minute.
Well, it is a profound problem, and it's one that probably isn't going to be resolved simply by trying to suggest that we're going to have more people out there picking up garbage. The more people we have picking up garbage, the more garbage that people put out. So ultimately, I think that it's going to have to be a collective resolution, one that talks in terms of technology to assist us in being able to locate those areas that have the highest need. And then I think what we have to do, and it would be my intent, that once we put ourselves in a position of correcting our structural deficit, we need to take a better look too at the ability to increase the number of folks that we have in our public works and our parks departments. Clearly, they are two departments that suffer the most whenever we're having job cuts. And as a result, you see that in the community at large when you find yourself having to deal with, as you said, when you drive over here, a number of unsightly disposal sites.
Mr. Scheer, a question from you to Mr. Rustano.
Mr. Rustano, you mentioned earlier the need to grow business. How would your administration facilitate the growth of business in Niagara Falls?
In a couple of ways. First thing that we'd have to look at is our current codes as well as our zoning structure. Some of the things that we have, the information that I've received over my almost 35 years in practice is that this continual drumbeat that Niagara Falls is a tough place to do business. So I think what we have to do is we have to take a look at those requirements, and we have to do our best to try and streamline them and to make them friendly to developers coming into the community. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that we don't do things that are safe or that are appropriate, but I think what we have to do is when the developer comes here, he or she has to know that someone's going to be with them through the entire step of the way so that they're not frustrated in the process. Additionally, in my conversations with the County Economic Development Department, they have a broader base of potential opportunities which we don't take advantage of, because we tend not to want to work cooperatively with other levels of government. That'll change with me. My sense is the more people that we can have marketing and trying to attract business to the city of Niagara Falls, the better. You know, the Wall Street Journal this past spring, early spring, indicated that they, in ranking the 1 through 53 best areas for business growth and job opportunity throughout America, ranked our region, the Buffalo region, 52nd. The only one below us was the Rochester area. And what they cited, the Buffalo Niagara Partnership cited a growing problem was excessive taxes as well as regulations. So some of this may be outside of our control relative to state regulations. But those things that we can do locally to make business a much more make business opportunities much more attractive here. Let's face it, we have an awful lot to offer in the community in terms of space, in terms of power opportunities with the through programs with the Power Authority. So we have much to offer.
Thank you, Mr. Rustano. Mr. Pecorello, 1 minute.
So I've proven that project management type role can work in the city on projects like South Junior, Power City Eatery that used to be a parole office, Wingate Hotel, and several others. So I would agree with that. The problem is that the details are important here. When you're talking about working with the county and the IDA, you're also talking about a tax break. Please know that always sounds good at the ribbon cutting, but that you paid for it. I would instead, and Bob, you made a good point, the excessive taxes. I think we'd be better served to actually address the holes in our tax rate to make it easier to do business here. If you talk to a business, as I do often, that's looking to invest, they want to know what their financial outlook is in a 5-year period. Right now, we can't give that to them because every year the mayor and the city council has to decide in the budget who they're going to harm more, a small business owner or a resident. There's no predictability, and we can change that with a new tax rate.
Matt and Seth.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Darrett and Mr. Pecorello.
Time goes by very quickly, and it's been over 25 years now that NFR has held property in the south end of the city. Is there any light at the end of any tunnel which would indicate that something will be built on that property? And if not, by NFR, is there a way the city can get it back?
If anyone tells you under the current structure that there would be development on those sites, they just have to look at the past. In 1996, I was in grade school, I went to one of their first meetings. Renderings were great. I think I knew at that time that something seemed like it was too good to be true. Land speculators, and that's what they are, like NFR, benefit from how we set up our taxes. They challenge assessments for buildings like the Turtle, like Nabisco. We're not able to do that. They are able to apply political pressure and to get what they want. So I can't look at any market force or market issue that keeps NFR from developing other than that they're land speculating. So again, I keep going back to the land value tax. I know that probably doesn't make a company like NFR happy. Good. They have decimated an entire neighborhood. And no one's going to fix that problem for us. A meeting with Howard Milstein and flying to New York City isn't going to fix it. We tried that. We need to stand up for ourselves and set policies that protect our taxpayers.
Mr. Steino.
I think that one of the things that's important is to recognize that if you're going to change the tax structure to target a particular developer, you're setting yourself up for a legal challenge that you can't win. So ultimately, taxes have to be equitable and uniform. And so if you're going to impose a new tax structure, then everybody's going to get it. And that means the folks sitting in this room are also going to face it. Businesses that are down in that area are also going to face it. Again, when I talk about the county, I don't talk about the IDA, I'm talking about the County Economic Development Group. The IDA is a whole separate entity. Ultimately, in the city of Niagara Falls, in the state of New York, incentives are critical. One would be foolish to think that we could be competitive throughout the state of New York without engaging in the same kind of effort that other communities do to attract business. So as a consequence, it seems to me that in order to be able to get NFR off the dime, you do one of two things. You either have to begin the conversation with them, because it hasn't happened in a while, or you can then utilize the county's efforts to move to eminent domain, which is always available to us.
Thank you, Mr. Rustino. Time to switch up again, gentlemen. Mr. Darrow, a question for you to Mr. Rustino.
Currently, the tourism industry receives approximately $1 million out of the shared funds from the Senecas, which obviously we know is not coming to us right now. In the future, would you ever consider pulling tourism promotion for Niagara Falls in as a city department?
More pressure to the current budget situation. It wouldn't be, to me, it wouldn't be the best, most prudent fiscal plan. As well as the fact that I think that the folks that are down there doing the tourism business, they're doing a decent job with what they do down there. I think they could do more. I certainly have some ideas, and I would like to share it with them. But I'm not so sure that I think bringing them into City Hall as a department would in any way be even fiscally responsible for the city, at least at this stage.
Mr. Piccarello, 1 minute.
I think in this case, you have to compare the work that an outside agency has done to past years. I think you should hire experts to do expert work. You've seen visitation go up. You've seen things like conferences and stays go up. We need that trend to stay in the positive direction because we rely on that revenue and that tax. So I think we should allow experts to execute those tasks, but obviously monitor them closely.
Mr. Shearer for Mr. Piccarello.
We are actually in a building that has had its own history of issues, and walking in, I just kind of thought to myself, we should ask about this library building. What can be done, if anything? Should we build a new library? Should we rehab this library? I mean, what do we do with this building?
So I work in an old library myself, the old Carnegie Library, and they come with challenges. I think that this building is obviously oversized, and I know individually, as a department that's done some of the repairs, that it's problematic. I think right now we have to make sure that we always prioritize our community having a library. This is a community center. It's not just a place for people to research. I think we do need to look at a long-term, and by long-term I mean 10-year plan for this building. It's not right-sized. I think that we could aggressively look for other uses for it. It's going to be complicated because it was built as an intricate library. But I do think if we're, I like this question because again I work at the Carnegie. Carnegie building is surrounded by some property. It could be retrofitted to being our library again. It could definitely be something more than office space. But at some point we can no longer spend money on small fixes in this building.
Mr. Estino, 1 minute.
I've been affiliated with the library almost my entire professional career, and this building throughout that entire time has never been conducive to what we have to do here, ever. The first thing that I would look at would be how to get out of here. And how to put the library, and it is true, the library is more than just a place for research and or books. It's a place where some folks come for a little bit of respite. So we would need to find a place. And quite honestly, I think that we have things available to us. We just have to look in the community for those available buildings where we might be able to make the change from here to there. This building, there is no way you're going to fix that first floor. They've been trying for a long time, maybe 30 years. Elevators come and go here. The heating comes and goes. The air conditioning comes and goes. There just really isn't an opportunity to spend any more money, especially in a cash-strapped city as we are. There just isn't any more money to spend on a building like this. Right now, we have to deal with it because we haven't found that place. But we do need to aggressively look for a new home for our main library.
Mr. Darrow, from you to Mr. Estino.
One of you accurately put that one of the departments that suffers losses are the Department of Public Works. Also in that category is code enforcement, which is without question a very necessary department in this city because many of the things that we talked about, the debris, the blight, the breaking down of certain buildings, is because of lack of code enforcement. Do you have a plan to possibly increase those bodies in that department?
My conversation with some of the folks in those departments are that first and foremost, we need to make sure that they've got clear direction and leadership. The men and women that work in those departments clearly want to do the best job that they can. So I think I start with making sure that they have clear direction, clear leadership, and that their tasks are within their ability to accomplish so that they are not feeling overwhelmed themselves by the task at hand. Again, Once we are able to right the structural ship, clearly those are the kinds of departments that need to have the most aggressive growth, because they're the ones that will attack these obvious problems more quickly. Just as we talk about trying to increase the police presence on the issue of crime, you want to increase those two departments as well, because those are issues that you see when you walk out your door. Those are issues that you see when you walk down a business district. So they're out there, we need to attack them, and the only way to do that is to ultimately grow those departments. But I think first and foremost, we need to make sure that those departments have clear leadership and clear direction.
Mr. Pecoraro, 1 minute.
So one of the reasons that they're discouraged is when they write a ticket for housing court, it sits for months. So imagine if a police officer kept writing speeding tickets, but they kept getting dismissed, they would probably stop writing the tickets. So we need to, going back to what I said, change the way that we prosecute violations in court. Also, we're underway with creating a 311 system, which is a smarter way to work, meaning that any time that you have a complaint or a code violation or something that you want to report in your neighborhood, it would be tracked, you'd be given a work ticket. It works in other cities. We've already found funding for it through the New York State Attorney General's office. So there's ways for us to work smarter, but we have to make sure that our code enforcement officers know that there is a result legally to the work that they're doing. And right now, they don't know that.
Mr. Scheer, question for Mr. Pecoraro.
We had a couple of reader questions regarding public safety, of course, which is important, but the questions pertain to the cost of public safety. And as was noted by a couple of the readers, public safety tends to be one of the bigger parts of the budget in terms of police officers and firefighters. So what, if anything, if you were elected mayor, could be done to maybe reduce the cost or get more out of the department, public safety specifically, police and fire?
It goes back to what I talk about, especially with staff reallocation. It's making sure that you're not hiring new officers until you reallocate officers that might be doing administrative work. So that is a way that I think we can show that to the community, that we can use current resources before we hire new. That's got to be the first thing that we do. And that goes across the board. If people don't know how money is being spent, they're going to be skeptical of it. And I don't think people realize that we can do a lot of things right now without spending more money to change the physical presence of our police officers. Now, there is, especially when there is an uptick in crime, increasing presence is important, but what we have to make sure that we're investing in the most is the data-driven policing. We've got some very smart women and men in that department that can create hotspots, know where the crime's going to happen, know who's going to commit the crime. That's what we need to invest in for the next 20 years.
Mr. Stein.
Clearly, there's a couple of things that I think we have to make sure we're careful of. Certainly, the deployment of our current personnel needs to be looked at very carefully, and then questions regarding how that is impacted by union contracts, so that we're making sure that we're doing what we have to do and making sure that we're not setting ourselves up for any employment difficulties. In terms of using technology, those folks are already in there. If they have that technology, I'm sure they're doing their best to use it. Ultimately, the question regarding the expense of public safety comes down to, first of all, making sure that if we do the delicate balance between determining how much overtime gets paid versus the cost of putting on additional bodies, that's the question that has to be made by leadership. They need to take a look at that carefully and closely to determine, is it time to put more people on, rather than just to pay the overtime cost. And that's a delicate balance that you have to take a look at each time you approach these kinds of problems. Clearly, redeployment of our personnel first.
Gentlemen, we'll switch again. Mr. Scheer, a question for you to Mr. Stein.
As you go door to door, and I know you've done a lot of campaigning already, what is the number one problem, or what is the problem that you hear the most often, and what would you do as mayor to fix it?
Well, the number one problem that I hear in the neighborhoods that I go in has to do with streets. It has to do with potholes, and it has to do with broken streets. It has to do with broken sidewalks. It has to do with an awful lot of those things that affect people right in their front yard. Ultimately, while a lot of these other things are impactful, and I'm sure that when folks are sitting at home and they read the newspaper about violence throughout the city that's also troubling. But the thing that really hits them between the eyes is when they go out their front door and they see something that they just wish would get repaired. I was in LaSalle just last night, and I had a gentleman tell me about a woman who's been waiting for 3 years to have a sidewalk repaired in front of her house after it had been torn out for some tree removal. Now to me, 3 years to wait for a sidewalk piece to be put in just doesn't seem right. It just doesn't seem appropriate. It doesn't seem like it's responsible government. What the reasons are for that, I'm not there, so I can't tell you how those decisions are made. But I can tell you this, that my plan would be to make sure that any of the projects that our city would be involved in, for instance, tree removal and things of that nature, that we would be on those repairs immediately. Relative to street repair, I think what we need to do is we need to take a good long look and then begin to work through the city quadrant by quadrant to be able to improve the infrastructure. Long term, what we can't have happen is we can't have 74th Street be on the list and then all of a sudden fall to the bottom because somebody made a phone call and their street gets done. I think people need to know that there's fairness in City Hall. That fairness begins with tackling the biggest problems first, and not depending upon who you know, but just the fact that the problem is there and we have to address it. And as public servants, that's our job. And so we should, and leadership should, be directing the workers in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Steino. Mr. Pecorello, 1 minute.
Streets, trees, and sidewalks. That's why we're creating the 311 system. Much to Bob's point, there needs to be a clear record of all work that's called in and to batch that work responsibly based on sending contractors out to specific areas. On the trees, we've already looked into this. I think we should use Niagara River Greenway funds immediately to trim back and remove dead trees. It's a major situation in our city. But it all goes back to the fact that for 40 years, we've never really had a system of tracking complaints that come in high priority projects. That's why we're proposing 311. It's an actual solution, and will bring some accountability to services and allow citizens to see what's happening and understand that maybe there's a reason that their sidewalk didn't get fixed, but they want to make sure to see that work is being done in their city.
Mr. Darrow and Mr. Pecorello.
I love the idea of a smaller library somewhere, but what comes to mind immediately is 520 Hyde Park Boulevard, and if this building should vacate, what do we do with these structures? Do we demolish them? We just let them sit there? Obviously, if they're not good enough for us to use, why would any developer or any business be interested in moving into a building that we have abandoned?
So I go back to the South Junior building. People said we were crazy to try to find a developer to do that, to have apartments. It was owned by the school district who abandoned it. It was absolutely headed to a demolition that the city would have to fund. There was 20 feet of water in the basement. But there are ways to find developers who want to renovate historic buildings. We need to have a better policy on finding adaptive reuses for these buildings. We've shown that it could work. The planetarium building now has a BOCES job training center in it. We had a role in that. South Juniors is alive again. Walland Avenue Homes is alive again. Luckily, we've run out of school buildings to have to save. Our next one is 520 Hyde Park, which has about $2 million of asbestos abatement. But we put out an article this year, and there's people that are interested in senior housing. The next step is we've got to have a conversation with the neighborhood, but there are developers that are interested. But here's the thing. Once you demolish it, it's gone, it's another vacant lot, and it's not taxable. We got to be smarter, and my team has shown that it's possible.
Mr. Stein.
520 Hyde Park is the question?
Yeah.
520 Hyde Park Boulevard is a very challenged building. I spent 20-something years of my career there. And it's the asbestos is an issue, there's mold that's an issue, there's a number of problems with that property. And I don't know whether or not a developer would see the value in maintaining that building if they purchased it. But long term, those are the kind of buildings that we need, at least areas rather, that we need to reinvent. Just leaving it there to sit doesn't necessarily present a good image for our city. And you know, as the school district begins to divest itself of buildings, the school South Junior. In fact, we had maintained South Junior, and we're happy to be able to get that project off. Now, the project obviously was presented in one particular fashion. Whether it's come to fruition or not is subject to debate, but at the end of the day, at least the building's being used, and that's always a good thing.
I would ask the neighborhood that question.
Hang on, Mr. McGraw. Mr. Shearer to Mr. Rustino.
There is currently a, I guess it would be a moratorium, I don't know how else to put it, but in the city that kind of prevents higher buildings from being built, like along the gorge and nearer to the river. And it's like a graded sort of a rule where, you know, the taller buildings that were supposed to be built sort of inner city and closer to the river, you know, it kind of goes down from there. I guess the general question is, how do you feel about development like on the river, along the gorge, or just removing the Robert Moses Parkway? I mean, is it a good idea to put, say, like hotels or things like that there? Should it remain more natural and keep the development to the inner city? You know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, a couple of things really. I'm not so sure that with the removal of the parkway, that the best plan, although I've heard so many people talk about turning it into commercial space and building hotels all along the gorge rim, I'm not so sure that I'm a fan of that. I think that that area can be used as well to supplement and augment our current tourist offerings. There's a lot of things that we can do with the now opened area now that the parkway is gone that can advance tourism. We can even think in terms of attractions that might be in that area that can attract tourists to a new adventure. But with regard to the whole height restriction, that's part of what I was suggesting earlier in the 1 minute that I had before on looking at zoning as well as code issues. To make the community more business friendly, we need to take a look at what those things do to those developers who may want to come in with an idea and how that changes our competitiveness with other locations that are looking for the kind of tourist expansion that we're looking for. So I'm not suggesting to you that construction should happen along the gorge rim, but I am suggesting that I think we need to take a closer look at how we, at height restrictions for structures, not necessarily on the rim and not necessarily in Center City, but in those areas in between where we have locations for more tourist industry development.
Mr. Pecorello, 1 minute.
I know Dan Davis is in the room, so I'm going to choose my words about gorge access very carefully. There needs to be green space along the gorge because that is a tourism asset. We have 3 waterfronts. It's not just the downtown waterfront. We've got to look at the gorge access, the waterfall itself, and then the river in LaSalle. I think we have to market our waterfronts, all 3 of them, better. I think that there are some arcane zoning rules about height, not on the gorge rim, that have been detrimental to some developments. But we have to make sure in all of those situations that we do what our team does with all of our projects, have a conversation with the neighborhood first, because people who have remained in those neighborhoods for a very long time have a strong opinion, and that opinion is valuable. But we need to best market our gorge and waterfront access, and if there is some old zoning law that's out there, I think we need to remove it. I don't think it's so much building code, but I think zoning could be looked at.
Mr. Darrow from Mr. Pecorello.
Back to tourism for a moment. Over the years, the tourism agency, whatever it may be, promoted the city of Niagara Falls and its attractions as a destination. State Parks has really never contributed any funding toward that, nor any personnel toward that. The tourism agency did it on their own, and as a reward, the city of Niagara Falls is thanked by having trolleys take tourists right into the state park and then back to their hotels, and the city doesn't see anything. Do you have any thoughts on how we can get more out of the state parks to contribute to our efforts to promote this as a destination for tourists?
I do, but again, it's a creative thinking way I'm taking a look at it, that the initial reaction might be, well, that's never going to work. I don't think that we can do that. I think that we should negotiate a parking revenue agreement with the state. I think that we can take that revenue and create a stakeholder group with members of the state, our state electeds, our local electeds, and decide how that money is going to be invested in our city. or we can start to talk about reducing the amount of parking on the state park property. I know that that is something different, but again, the system as it is now isn't benefiting us. The investments that have been made by the state are impressive in size and scope, but they do make it easier just to connect a visitor from their vehicle to a state park property. I think we need to renegotiate a better agreement. That's not an adversarial statement. I think that there's a way to work with the state to do it.
Mr. Steiner, 1 minute.
Not only do I think that we should have a conversation with the state about how they could become a better partner with our tourism business, and that's certainly something that is long overdue. We should have had that conversation many years ago. But in any event, certainly my approach would be to begin that discussion so that we can at least become partners in the business of tourism rather than adversaries or competitors. The other group that I also have had a chance to have a brief conversation with is the Bridge Commission. And the fact that they too can in many ways contribute more to our downtown area, because I believe that there's a point at which we have been providing an awful lot to many of these agencies, and they've been drawing revenue from us for a long time. And so now the time has come for us to sit back and have a conversation with them about what they can do to give back. And none of these things would be designed, again, to become adversarial, but rather to simply raise the question of how do we become partners in what we both want to achieve, and that is the free flow of folks as well as our tourist industry.
Gentlemen, we've come to the point where you are down to your last questions. Mr. Darrow, you have one. Mr. Shear, you have one. Mr. Darrow, 2. Mr. Ristino.
We talked about the possibility of a control board. Have you given any consideration, possibly, to something that was done in Niagara Falls in the 70s called the CMAB, which was the City Management Advisory Board, which was a collaboration of top businessmen in the community to advise the mayor and the city council on how to best fix a budget? Would there be any thoughts toward that direction?
Well, to tell you the truth, given the circumstances that the city faces, I'll be happy to take all the help I can get. But here's the thing that I would also say to you, because I know that a group of individuals did gather a few years back to provide some insight. One thing that I could assure you is that if I'm going to convene women and men to come together to talk about how they can help our city, I'm darn well going to make sure that what they recommend, we try to see if we can implement. Because these are folks who are giving their time and their knowledge to try and help the community that we're all trying to save as well. So in doing that, I think that it is most effective if once we get recommendations, we act on them. And those recommendations come to us as well from the State Controller's Office. There's a variety of state agencies who have come in here and provided us information. As I say, there was a local group convened for that very purpose. So yes, would I consider that? Obviously, take all the help I can. If all you folks in this room have an idea and you want to help me, please write it down. I would love to get those as well. But in the end, it's not just asking people to come in and talk about stuff. But once you do that, it's really about putting some of that stuff into action, because I know that you all care as much as Seth and I care. So it's important to make sure that we don't just have people come in and talk about it, but we get things done.
Mr. Pecorello, 1 minute.
So my approach to a new tax restructuring actually takes into account what local business officers, officials came to the city with. The fact that their non-homestead rate is harming them, and the shift isn't aggressive enough. So what I'm talking about is actually addressing what they're asking for. So business owners know more about the business environment than government officials, and they're experts on it or not. That's why I am presenting a really shift in our tax structure to make it easier for them to invest. We can say that we're going to aggressively incentivize business. We have to make sure that we're protecting the business that is here while also being financially responsible.
Thank you, Mr. Pecorello. Mr. Shear, you have the final question.
All right, I think I'll try to end on a little more of a positive note. What would you consider to be the city's top asset, and what would you do to sort of build on that if you were elected mayor?
You, Mr. Pecorello.
So it goes to my opening statement, and It might sound corny, but it's the community, it's the people. I live it every day. An idea can come up from someone. They might be skeptical that it'll happen, but if they come and create community around an idea, it can work here. Large or small, I talked about projects like South Junior. Things like the skate park. It started with a kid saying, hey, can we build a skate park? Not expecting that we were going to take him seriously. We built it. He skates it now. We have an immense talent here that goes untapped, and it's our ability to work together and form community. And I've known that my entire life. My parents taught me that. So absolutely our asset and the solution to all of our problems and our pathway forward is not in a large agreement or ribbon cutting or a political nicety. It's people on the street level getting together and creating a solution.
Gentlemen, thank you. You've been a very good audience, you really have. And we're not done yet, so Mr. Rustino, you have 1 minute.
I happen to think that the people of the city are also very important to the success of the city. I know as I walk through neighborhoods that so many folks have so many good ideas about how to improve the city, and some of the things that I hear are just incredible brand new ideas that you wonder why nobody else has thought of these things and why they haven't put them into motion. So it seems to me that working not only within our own community, but with the communities that are around us, the people who maybe have left our community and moved to Lewiston or Town of Niagara or one of those places, those communities have as much interest in making sure that Niagara Falls is successful. So we need to work as a region to improve our city. And so I think our greatest asset is our people.
Gentlemen, thank you. That concludes the question portion of the debate. I want to thank you all. You've been a magnificent audience. You've been very respectful. We're now going to ask the candidates to each give us a closing statement in true Super Bowl coin toss fashion. The loser of the coin toss at the beginning will go first. Mr. Pecorello, 2 minutes.
I'm going to change my closing a little bit. If we are looking for an excuse or a reason not to make a change in our city, we'll always find it. They've been found here for 50 years, much longer than any of us have been around. We have to embrace creative thinking. We have to look at other cities that have had successes, and we have to adopt them. We can't just talk about ideas anymore. We don't have the time. We don't have 4 years. We don't have 2. So I feel confident I'm the candidate in this race that is willing to talk about a detailed platform that includes creative thinking. In my opening, I talked about how much I love Niagara Falls and its home, but that's not the reason that I'm asking for your vote. It's not a good enough reason. Words aren't good enough. As a candidate, I am proposing a tax system that can reduce your rates and incentivize small business investment, and finally stop land speculation. I think it's so important, that's why I keep talking about it. I'm prioritizing community policing, neighborhood investment, and running on a proven track record of management and community accomplishment. I've presented a detailed platform that puts your quality of life before anything else. As an individual, I'm presenting the temperament that's needed to lead the city through some really difficult times. I've been fortunate to be a part of leadership for a few years now, and I know that temperament is what separates true servant leaders from politicians. I've learned that in leadership, the hard days are the norm, and the easy days are for somebody else. This election is about service. It's not about name recognition. It's about you, and it's not about the candidates. I know that I'm the candidate in this race with the platform and the temperament to best serve your needs and provide leadership that Niagara Falls can be proud of.
I've written down all of your names. I'm all set. Mr. Rustino, your closing statement, please.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you all for being here. I can tell you that leadership is the most important thing that this city is going to need for the next 4 years. We find ourselves in the midst of some very difficult problems, many of which you've heard through the questions that were raised today. In my nearly 35 years of practicing law, one of the things that I have always prided myself on is the ability to listen carefully to people's problems and then help them try to solve them. That's what I've done. It's what I'm trained to do. The problems that confront the city are not problems that are difficult to resolve. They're just problems that are going to take hard work. It isn't going to be the question of just flipping a switch, taking a look at what somebody else does and trying to transplant it here. The reality is, the best way to fix Niagara Falls is for us to roll up our sleeves and work hard at it. That's why I say to you that the idea of working in unity with our other levels of government within the city, to streamline the effort of government services, to work with other layers of government throughout the county in order to be able to broaden our economic base, those are the things that just don't happen today and haven't happened for a long time. The city of Niagara Falls can't fix this on its own. It doesn't matter how many theories we speak about, how many items that we trot out as specifics that are counterproductive to the growth of our city. In the end, Niagara Falls can fix itself only with the help of some of our surrounding neighbors, as well as the county. I think that an effort to try and do it on our own is what has failed for so many years. So I would ask, if you're looking to build a strong town, the way you build a strong town is by all of us working together, in unity, with our neighbors, in order to grow the city of Niagara Falls to become the engine that helps move Western Niagara County. And I know that it's leadership that's going to take us there, and I can tell you that I'm prepared to be the leader that can help listen and bring us to that prosperity.
Thank you, Mr. Rustino. That concludes our debate, if you will indulge me for 10 seconds. These two gentlemen came here and spent a lot of time with you tonight. They listened to you out on the campaign trail. They're your future. You need to go and vote. You control the destiny of Niagara Falls. You do it with your vote. Please exercise your vote on primary day. Thank you again.